I am Tutaleni Asino, and I am the co-director of Learning Science for Innovators program. Our goals for today are very simple. I'm going to briefly just go over in terms of what learning sciences are, why research matters in the EdTech context, and then explore collaborations and opportunities with CMU. I've been working in this space of learning sciences and educational technology, instructional design for many years now. I just have on screen here some of the recent projects that I have been working on. I want to give you a little bit of the context of how I come to this conversation and the work that I do so that you can get an understanding of how I'm perhaps structuring some of the conversation the way I'm structuring it. So my background is in learning design and technology. I have a dual PhD in learning design and technology, and also in comparative and international education. So what that means is that I tend to very much focus on um, educational technology, or rather more broadly, learning and teaching with educational technologies, specifically more emerging technological tools across all learning spaces. And what I mean by that is that I'm not just focused in K-12 education, or rather schools. I'm not just interested in universities, formal learning environment, but I want to know how learning happens even in informal learning spaces, whether it's with adults or with children and so on. I'm particularly fascinated by how innovations are accepted across contexts, or what we call diffusion of innovation. How does one innovation that you create, how is it now become sustainable or used by a lot of people and accepted across communities and so forth? I'm giving this introduction to sort of preview the next part of the conversation, which is about really research. So I have spent the last few years of my career really not just designing and developing educational technology products, but also researching their effectiveness when they're from the people who are using them, but also in terms of just looking at the effectiveness and efficacy of designs and things of that nature. So I am not just interested in whether something looks good or bad. I'm also interested in whether or not that tool that's developed is actually help support learning. And some of you will know a little bit about this when we go into the review of what the learning sciences are, and how it connects to the tools that you're developing. So part of the conversation here today is for us then to talk more about how do you know that what you are creating is actually uh, achieving the goal that you have set for it. And hopefully, the goal that you have set for it is about improving learning, supporting learning, or supporting or improving education much more broadly. So I've done a lot of different projects. Um, the Native American middle school students after school STEM program looks more at using traditional knowledges and indigenous knowledges of the Native Americans in the US as a way of helping students get engaged with STEM. And then have a virtual citizen science expo and Spotty Rain campaign, which is focusing on working with rural librarians to help support communities learn about science, specifically about drought. Also, other projects, specifically in Namibia, that use interactive voice recognition tools through mobile devices, and so on. So, a little bit of a background here. The standard of schooling that we have right now, we have to ask questions about whether or not it's meeting the present day society. the standard model that we have of schooling right now, of education, sort of emerged from an industrial age where it was much more effective to create and produce graduates who are needed for an industrial economy. Because some of our African economies are still at the stage of where they are going through an industrial process. So there's still a need to produce graduates who are going to transform economies from an industrial perspective. But we also now need to produce graduates who are going to be engaged in what is commonly known as the Fourth Industrial Revolution or the Fifth Industrial Revolution. We need graduates who are going to be building and working in factories, but we also need graduates who are going to be working with the latest machine learning models and so forth. And to be able to do that, we need to create a little bit of a shift. So globally, there's this shift to a much more innovative economy where we have to look at the advances in research on learning, in other words, how learning happens, because we can't just replicate what's happening from one context and put it in another. We have learned over time that that does not work. Context is incredibly important. And learning itself is very, very much contextual, very much culturally based, and having to understand a bit about how learning happens across different contexts and how humans learn best is an incredibly important aspect of the time period we're living in today. We're not just producing graduates who are going to be working in factories only. We're still going to need those, but we have a lot of others who are now also needed for an innovative economy. So, what does that mean within this context? We then have to look at the importance of the learning sciences, because how a person learns is incredibly important, especially for those of us who are in education and for those of us who are entrepreneurs aiming at designing products that are going to support learning. So, learning science, as we know, is an interdisciplinary field of study that looks at how people learn. It draws from cognitive science, psychology, sociology, other different spaces of education. And the focus here really is on how people learn in the real world, in real world learning environments. And then we also look at how to integrate technology in those learning environments. From a learning science perspective, we believe that how humans learn can be studied, it can be described, it can be predicted. And if you are able to systematically apply these evidence-based principles, then you are able to create engaging and effective learning experiences. So if you are an entrepreneur who is using learning science research and principles, if you are able to systematically apply these evidence-based principles, you are going to improve your product, because at the end of the day, you'll be able to create a product that is engaging, effective, and improves those learning experiences. Um, a lot of the learning science, especially from a CMU's perspective, employs a human-centered design approach, which basically looks at not just the design of tools, but also looking at the rich data sets that are created, that are generated from these tools, and then use that data set to be able to iterate and improve the design of that product, right? So again, quick overview just of learning sciences from that perspective. As you see from this picture on the right here, learning sciences draws from a lot of different disciplines or fields within education and beyond. You might hear the term sciences of learning or learning sciences. For the context of our conversation, we can use those terms interchangeably and have them mean the same thing. Depending on who you talk to, there might be some disagreement or discussion about what each of those terms mean, but for the context of our conversation, we are really just going to be using those interchangeably. So, how do people learn? What do we know about how people learn? We know that it is incredibly important to have active engagement with the material and the content that people are learning from, right? We know that social interactions and collaborations are incredibly important. This is why you have so many different tools that allow students to work together on projects. Um, if you look at many of our contexts in our daily lives, we rarely do uh, things alone. We are working with people. We're collaborating on solving problems. We are collaborating on developing tools. We are a collaborative. We do believe in collaboration in a lot of our, especially in our African context. So from a learning perspective, collaboration is an incredibly important aspect of that process. We also know that meaningful learning is very much dependent on the context, right? Learning is very much more meaningful if it is context bound. And it also involves a lot of ongoing feedback and reflection for the learners that are engaged. So why should entrepreneurs care about research? That's really the big question that we get asked when we are doing some of our workshops and some of our deep dive or onboarding. In one of the sessions, somebody remarked that, wait a minute, I signed up for an entrepreneur or MasterCard EdTech fellowship, but I feel like I'm back in school, and why am I doing all of these things? So why should an entrepreneur care about research? There's a few reasons why that is. One of it is that how do you know that what you're doing is actually working, right? How can you prove that? That is important because if you're going to promote your product and expect whether it's schools or ministries of education or other stakeholders to take up your product, then you need to be able to show that it works. And the research aspect of this allows you to make that argument. So research allows you, or rather defines what works and what doesn't, right? So and a lot of the time, we tend to think about research in a much more complicated perspective. But for me, I think research in a way is not that complicated. Research at a very basic and fundamental level is really just about asking a question so that you can get an answer to what you want to know, right? So at the very basic level, research is about asking a question and finding an answer to that question. So if I ask the question, how are you? I'm trying to find out how you're doing. And in that question, the response that you give me then gives me information that I can use to answer whatever reason that I'm asking that question, right? So, how are you? If I ask everybody in this room, so let's do a research right now as we are here live. So, I want you to look to use your chat feature and just answer a quick question for me. How are you doing right now? Okay, let's see. The weather is bright, shining, feeling good, never been better. I'm doing well, just hungry. Somebody get Nana some food because we wanted to concentrate, doing great, and so forth. All right, so I have 21 people who have responded, right? And so far from this, I have 44 people on the call. So I can say that based on my research, out of 44 participants, I have 47% who have responded to my research, right? I have 47% who have responded to my research. And I can say based on everything that I have read, nobody has said that they are feeling bad. So everybody's either doing good or doing okay. So I can say about 100% of the participants feel okay, or doing great, or are all feeling very positive, right? And I think from the 22, 9% who reported something that could be slightly negative or not feeling so well. Busola is okay, but she's not really sure. And Nana is feeling a bit hungry, right? So what I want is I want to illustrate here in this one really simple example that research does not have to be complicated. Research is simply about asking a question and then getting a response. And then from that response, you can then make certain claim or certain argument based on that. So based on my quick one question survey, I can say generally of all the participants that we have right now on the call, the majority of them are feeling good or feeling great, right? Now, from an entrepreneur standpoint, that is just the beginning. Something as simple as how do the users like your product, right? It's not the best research question, but it's a simple question. How do they like your product? What is the experience of the user when they're using your tool? You want to know that because then, depending on the question that you get from there, you can then decide on whether or not you need to make certain adjustment to your product. So it really helps you define what works, what doesn't, and be able to give you information that you can act on. Uh, Entrepreneurs should care about research because it also helps you avoid wasting resources on things that are ineffective. Anyone who has been a designer or a developer knows that sometimes we get caught into creating things that we like, right? So if I like something, I really want to make sure that it's embedded in that tool that I have. But that's not always going to be the most useful way to do that because you might like something and you might really want to put a lot of resource in there. But if it's not working, if it's not serving the user or it's not helping them do what they want to be able to do, then you're just wasting your resources on a tool that is really ineffective. You can only find that out by doing research or by collecting data on that tool that you have, right? Research also helps you improve product impact and also increase user satisfaction. So these are just some of the reasons why it is important for entrepreneurs to be able to care about research. I know some of you might have other reasons why you think you should care about it. So please feel free to share those in the chat window, right? Another reason is because research leads to informed design in practice, right? Research allows us to develop or create informed designs and really put those in practice. So if you can embed research in your product development cycle, you will get data that then allow you to iterate and improve on that. So you can create your first version that might not be the best, or you can create your first version that you really think is absolutely great. But then when you conduct research and you start to figure out how users are using your product, how the students are actually engaging with it, you might get some other data that can actually help you improve on that. So if you can embed research as part of your product development cycle, that actually is going to benefit you in the long run. By doing research, you're also able to generate case studies that maybe others can also then use to be able to develop and build and improve their product as well. Research also help inform iterative prototyping process because now you have more and more users that can actually provide you with more details and more information that you can use to, again, to improve on your product. So evidence-based research is really a must-have if you are an entrepreneur, especially if you're an entrepreneur who is an EdTech fellow in the MasterCard Foundation program. Because it's not just about complying with a requirement, which is about research, it's about quality. It's about improving quality of your product. It helps you dispel different myths around sort of the MVPs that you're producing. It also helps, challenge your own assumptions about what you already have about learning or about how people are using your tool to learn. It helps create different frameworks and tools that can help you validate different learning outcomes. So anytime a user is using your product, they are generating data. You need to figure out how or what you are going to do with that data set. So what are some of the research that you could be doing? You can do either formative or what is also known as summative research. And the main difference between formative and summative, if you are not aware, is just that formative is done during the process. And then summative, you can think about it in terms of summary, almost at the end of the cycle, right? So if you're developing your product, if you're in the process of developing and you have maybe some prototyping users or a small group that is using your tool, maybe you have one school and you want to expand to a larger population, that could be part of your formative process, right? Because you're using that data to, again, be able to inform your product. The other way to think about this is that in terms of formative, think about it if you are a student in a class. And throughout, let's say your course goes from January to May, and each month your teacher is giving you quizzes. And then in May, at the last end of the class, you get a final exam. So the final exam becomes the summative, which says, okay, let's figure out what you have learned from this whole course. And the formative are the little quizzes that you are taking throughout this course. The purpose of formative quizzes in this example is that then the teacher can use those quizzes to be able to see what the students know and then be able to improve, right? So if I'm giving a quiz throughout the course of the length of the program, and I find that all my students are doing bad in a certain part of what I'm teaching, then I can use that result to then be able to help me maybe tweak a few things here and there. Because by the time I reach the summative component, it might be a little bit too late that I can't really improve on anything. So this can also be in terms of the product that you have created. If your product is teaching, let's say, students about mathematics, you can have formative quizzes or formative assessments throughout the whole process, and then have a final assessment at the end. I think research is the same way, where you can have small little mini formative research and then have a larger one at the end of that, right? So you can do formative research, summative research that look at the end of the product. You can also do needs assessment. What do your users need from your product? And you can do a lot of different usability studies. You have a lot of different methods to be able to do this research, whether you're doing interviews, surveys, A to B testings. analytics based on the data set that you have generated. So you have a lot of different ways. Where does that take us in terms of collaboration with CMU, right? So you have an ability, an opportunity to create research partnership with CMU. You have access to research expertise and a lot of different evaluation support. We can co-design and pilot different aspects based on the product that you're creating. You also have an opportunity as an EdTech fellow who is here on the continent to integrate and introduce very African-centered research into the learning sciences so that the research that you're doing on your product provides very contextually appropriate understanding of the barriers that you're facing, right? What barriers to integration are you facing in your context? What are some of those opportunities that you're discovering? What are some of the things that you're learning based in your specific country, based in your specific community? You can produce research that then can also inform the larger learning sciences community. You can build research into your timeline, into your budget, and so on, and be able really to use evidence to support maybe funding and scaling requests that you might have in your product. So again, here to just sort of summarize it, what can research and more specifically, what can learning science in broadly rather do for you? Learning science, part of the reason why we are pushing this notion of learning science principles, part of the reason why we are encouraging you to engage in research in your product is that it helps again with product efficacy, right? If your goal is to support learning, then you have to answer the question of how are you doing that? If you're saying your tool helps students learn math better, how can you prove that? If you're saying your product help students be more engaged with STEM, then you need to provide evidence. You can use learning sciences to help with increased user engagement. But now, if you're saying you're using learning sciences techniques to be able to do that, then you have to prove it. And that proving part is where the research comes in. Because the last part of your product is the last one that's really important, which is that stakeholder trust. If you want your stakeholder to trust that your product is going to be beneficial for them and for their context, then you have to provide them evidence. And that evidence is what is research. You get that evidence from research. So if you want the educators, schools, district, ministers, and everybody else to believe that your product is actually doing what it says it's supposed to be doing, then you have to provide them evidence for that. Research on your product, integration of learning science products provides that level of trust because people want to know that the resource that they are buying, that they have sound pedagogical foundation, that they are based in history of evidence on education and on learning. And you can only really do that and show those evidence if you are then able to do research and provide evidence, right? So again, as a call to action, what I want us really to think about here is what's one area of your product where learning sciences can help, right? Think about this question. What is the one area of your product where learning sciences can help? If you answer that question, then you can commit to one change in your product process today and commit to finding evidence on how that one area of your product that you think learning science can really help and finding a way to then be able to prove that. So once you have made some of those determinations, you can reach out to CMU for a lot of different research opportunities and collaborations. that you can then we can work with you to engage in research. We have a variety of personnel, faculty, professors who do a lot of this work for a living, and many of them will be more than happy to work with you, to hear from you. And if you don't even know where to start, we are also very much happy to work with you on where to get started. When it comes to research, it's really about knowledge co-creation, right? It's not just about ensuring that your product is doing what it's supposed to be doing, but there's also a larger aspect here, which I touched on earlier, which is your company and your product has an opportunity to provide and contribute to an understanding of educational design for learners in and across African contexts, right? So you can collaborate on the latest EdTech instructional and data mining approaches. You can collaborate with with CMU on perhaps new ways of design. You can collaborate on learning more about how to do user interface development in your specific context. You can collaborate on research on measurement of impact and effectiveness. And in so doing, you are adding more explicit examples from an African context into the broader academic literature. And at the same exact time, contributing to improving your product and also building trust with stakeholders through that research. It provides additional credibility for your product, and the more research you have, the more possibility and that you are able to strengthen access to funding opportunities, because you can now say, we have done research on our tool, and this is the promising outcome that we have, and now we need maybe additional funding for that. Again, basic takeaway: learning sciences supports better EdTech products. That is really one of the cornerstone of our program here, that the learning sciences can help support better EdTech products. And in so doing, we can improve and help improve education on a broader context. Second, research helps build impactful product, right? So if you can conduct research on your product, you are actually contributing to its impact. And I believe that can contribute to your bottom line.